My name is Alara, and for most of my life, I believed my primary purpose was to be an anchor. Not in the romantic, grounding sense, but in the heavy, practical way of a weight dropped in a storm, meant to hold the family ship steady while the winds of my parents' choices howled around it. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a modest craftsman bungalow with peeling porch paint and a garden full of unruly lavender. It's a life I built with my husband, Liam, a life of quiet predictability that felt like a sanctuary. We have 2 children, Leo and Maya, whose laughter is the truest sound I know. My own childhood was anything but quiet. I grew up in the shadow of my parents' grand performance. Genevieve and Richard weren't just my mother and father, they were curators of an elaborate exhibit on prosperity. They ran a boutique home goods store downtown called the Gilded Finch, a place that smelled of potpourri and insolvency. It was filled with beautiful, overpriced things, Italian linens, hand-thrown pottery, artisanal soaps that looked too lovely to use. They were masters of image. Our life was a series of beautifully arranged vignettes, the perfectly set holiday table, the cashmere sweaters worn even as a shut-off notice was tucked behind the fruit bowl, the breezy talk of a European vacation that never materialized. The money, when it came, arrived in sudden, feverish bursts, usually from a small inheritance or a foolishly extended line of credit. It was spent just as quickly on things that would bolster the facade: a new German sedan, a catered garden party, a donation to a local arts gala with their names printed in the program. My father, a man with a charming smile and a gambler's soul, used to say, "You don't build wealth by saving pennies, Alara. You build it by looking like you already have it." I was the quiet, watchful child, the one who saw the strain behind the smiles. They called me their little accountant, their serious one. My sister Serena was the star. She was effervescent and beautiful, a perfect reflection of their shimmering, unstable world. She inherited their charm and their recklessness in equal measure, leaving a trail of broken hearts and unpaid bills in her wake. They adored her. She was their masterpiece. I was their ballast. They loved me, I think, in the way one loves a functional appliance. I was reliable. I was sensible. I was, in their words, a bit boring. "Your problem, darling," my mother once told me over a tense dinner, "is that you've mistaken stability for a personality." For years, I believed her. I became the family's soft place to land. I helped them navigate insurance paperwork, deciphered loan agreements, and discreetly paid a utility bill or 2 when things got dire. When Serena's latest venture collapsed, I would be the one to lend her enough to get by, a loan we all knew was a gift. I did it not out of profound generosity, but out of a deep, conditioned sense of duty. It was the price of admission to my own family. Saying no felt like a transgression, a betrayal of the role I had been assigned. Each refusal was met with wounded silence, a subtle recalibration of their affection that left me feeling cold and selfish. So, I learned to give just enough to keep the peace, to maintain the fragile illusion of a functional family. Then, about 4 months before the trip that would change everything, the request came. It was Serena's son, my nephew, Daniel. He was a sweet, anxious boy, and he was having a terrible time in school. The diagnosis was a cocktail of social anxiety and learning difficulties, and a therapist had recommended a specialized boarding school in the mountains. It was, they said, his only real chance. The price tag was astronomical. My parents and Serena pooled their resources, sold some things, and managed to secure a conditional spot for him, but they were short. They needed $25,000 for the initial deposit. They called me together, a united front of desperation. Their voices were soft, reasonable. It was for Daniel. It was life-changing. They would pay me back, of course, as soon as things turned around. Every word was a carefully chosen hook, designed to snag my conscience. A familiar sickness bloomed in my stomach. I loved my nephew, and the thought of his suffering was a physical pain. But I also recognized the pattern, the bottomless pit of their need. I looked around my own small home, thought of my own children, of the college funds we meticulously fed with small, regular deposits, of the new roof we were saving for. With a voice that felt like a stranger's in my own throat, I said no. I'm so sorry, I said, the words tasting like ash. I wish I could help, I truly do. But we can't. That's more than we have saved for a down payment on a house. We have our own family, our own future to think about. The silence on the other end of the line was not angry. It was something far worse. It was cold, crystalline, and absolute. Of course, my mother said finally, her voice stripped of all its warmth. I forgot. You have your boundaries. The line went dead, and so did our communication for weeks. Until the invitation to the family reunion arrived. It was to be held near Anacortes, a gathering of the extended clan before a weekend on the San Juan Islands. Suddenly, the chill thawed. The emails were cheerful, the texts were full of exclamation points. They couldn't wait to see us. All was forgiven, it seemed. They'd figured out the school situation, they said breezily when I cautiously asked. Everything was working out beautifully. I didn't press for details. I told myself it was relief I felt, but it was closer to willful ignorance. I wanted to believe it, so I did. A few days before we were set to leave, my father called. Sweetheart, he'd begun, his voice smooth as honey. Our car is going to be packed to the gills. Would you mind terribly taking a small bag for us? Just an old satchel with some of your mother's things for the islands. We'll grab it from you when we get there. Of course, Dad, I'd said, grateful for the simple, harmless request. It felt like a tiny bridge back to normalcy. The morning of our departure, he brought it over. It was a handsome, vintage leather satchel, the kind of thing you'd find at the Gilded Finch, worn in all the right places. He handed it to me with a broad, confident smile. Thanks, Solara. You're a lifesaver. I hefted it into the back of our Subaru, nestled between a cooler of juice boxes and the kids' duffel bags. I didn't open it. I didn't think to. I just saw the smile on my father's face as we pulled away, a smile of such profound, untroubled relief that for a fleeting second, I remember thinking, that's strange. Then the thought dissolved into the misty Oregon morning, and I turned my mind to the road ahead. The drive north on the I-5 corridor is a ribbon of gray asphalt unwinding through a world of deep, perpetual green. The air was cool and damp, smelling of pine and wet earth. Leo and Maya were plugged into their tablets in the back, their quiet bickering a familiar, comforting soundtrack. Liam sat beside me, navigating our playlist, his hand resting on my knee. For the first 2 hours, it was exactly what I had hoped for, peaceful, ordinary, a gentle slide into a weekend of forced smiles and my aunt's notoriously bland potato salad. I was driving, as I always do. I have a sensitive stomach and an even more sensitive need for control, a combination that makes me a permanent designated driver. We were nearing the turnoff for Anacortes, the waters of the Puget Sound just beginning to glitter through the trees, when Liam went still. I felt it before I saw it, a sudden rigidity in his frame, a drawing in of energy. I glanced over. His face, usually so open and calm, had gone pale. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but he wasn't seeing it. He whispered it, a sound so faint it was almost stolen by the hum of the tires. Elara, turn the car around. Now. I laughed, a small, nervous puff of air. What? We're almost there. Please, he said, and the word was sharp, brittle. Just turn around. Take the next exit. Please. My husband is not a man given to panic. Liam's emotional landscape is a calm, rolling plain. I have seen him handle a burst pipe in our basement and a 103-degree fever in our daughter with the same unruffled competence. The raw, undiluted fear in his voice was so alien that it bypassed all my logic and went straight to my hands and feet. I flicked on the turn signal and guided the car onto the exit ramp, a gentle curve of road that felt like a lifeline being thrown to me. The moment we were off the highway, his shoulders slumped. A long, shuddering breath escaped him, the kind you take after surfacing from too long underwater. Okay, I said, my heart starting to thrum a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Are you going to tell me what that was about? He shook his head, not looking at me. Just drive for a bit. Away from the highway. Drive where? I don't know. Anywhere. In the back, Leo piped up, his voice laced with the indignation of a 10-year-old whose routine has been disrupted. Mom? Are we going the wrong way? We We forgot something, sweetie, I said, the life forming on my tongue with practiced ease. What did we forget? Maya asked. Is it my fuzzy whale? I didn't answer. Liam was silent, his jaw tight, his gaze lost somewhere in the passing landscape of dripping ferns and logging trucks. We drove for 20 minutes, the silence in the car growing heavier with each mile, thick with unspoken questions. My own guilt, a constant, low-grade hum in my life, began to amplify. Had I forgotten to pack something crucial? Did I misunderstand the directions? I scrolled through a mental list of my potential failings, a familiar exercise. Finally, Liam spoke. Take that turnoff. There. He pointed to a narrow, unmarked gravel road that disappeared into a dense stand of Douglas firs. It was an access road, a place that led to nowhere, a place you would only ever find if you were already lost. I pulled the car over, the tires crunching on the loose stones. The air was suddenly still, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engine. Liam unbuckled his seatbelt. Stay here with the kids. He got out and walked to the rear of the vehicle. I watched him in the rearview mirror, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. He stood there for a moment, his back to me, before opening the trunk. I couldn't see what he was doing. My pulse was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my chest. After a minute that stretched into an eternity, I heard the soft thud of the trunk closing. He came to my window and tapped on the glass. His face was grim, etched with a weariness that seemed to age him by a decade. Can you get out, Alara? I need you to see this. Why? Liam, you're scaring me. I know, he said, his voice gentle but firm. That's why you need to see it. I got out of the car, my legs feeling unsteady. The air was cold, clean, and utterly indifferent. He led me to the back of the Subaru and opened the trunk again. He didn't say a word. He just pointed at the vintage leather satchel. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he unzipped it. He reached inside, past a neatly folded cashmere sweater, and pulled back a toiletry bag. And then, the world stopped. It wasn't a sudden, violent halt. It was a slow, sickening descent, like falling through ice into black water. Inside the toiletry bag, sealed in clear, professional-looking plastic, were dozens of blister packs filled with small, white pills. Beneath them were more, bundled together with rubber bands. Stacks of them. It wasn't a few stray pills for a headache. It was a quantity that had no innocent explanation. It was merchandise. I stared, my mind refusing to assemble the pieces. I saw the pills, I saw the bag my father had given me, I saw the triumphant smile on his face, and I saw the international border we had been minutes away from crossing. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, silent clang. Fear hadn't arrived yet. It was still on its way, a distant siren. What I felt in that moment was a profound, hollowing grief. A betrayal so complete it felt like it was rewriting my own history, turning every memory of trust and duty into a cruel joke. They put that in our car, I whispered. My voice was a thin, reedy thing. Liam nodded, his eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. With our children, I added, the words choking me. Another nod. I looked up at the sky, a vast, uncaring canvas of bruised gray. It was just a normal Tuesday afternoon in the Pacific Northwest, and my life was falling apart on the shoulder of a forgotten road. How? I finally managed to ask. How did you know? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound exhaustion. I didn't know, he said. Not for sure. But I've been thinking about it ever since your dad dropped off the bag. The way he and your mom looked at us when we left. It wasn't just happy. It was victorious. Like they'd pulled something off. And then the phone call about the school, how they suddenly figured it out after you said no. It was all just a feeling, a really bad one. And the closer we got to the border, the stronger it got. It was a gamble. Them asking us to do this. I suddenly knew I wasn't willing to bet our lives on them being decent people. He looked at me then, his gaze steady and clear. You've spent your whole life making excuses for them, Alara. Seeing the good or what you hoped was good. I don't have that filter. I just saw the risk. His words didn't hurt. They landed like a terrible, clarifying truth. He had seen what I had trained myself my entire life to ignore. I turned without a word and walked back to the driver's side. I sat for a long moment, My hands trembling in my lap, the warmth of the car's heater a strange comfort against the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I started the engine. The kids, lost in their digital worlds, didn't even look up. They had forgotten about the reunion, about their cousins, about the promise of a weekend by the sea. We drove. Not back toward Portland, not toward Anacortes. Just away. My phone began to buzz in the center console. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I ignored it. It buzzed again a minute later. My father. Then Serena. A frantic, desperate chorus of calls we both knew we could not answer. They weren't worried about us. They were worried about their package. An hour later, moving on instinct, I found myself turning onto the familiar streets of my parents' neighborhood. We hadn't discussed it, but we both knew what we had to do. There was no other way to end this. I pulled into their driveway. The porch light was on, a lonely beacon in the fading afternoon light. Liam got out and retrieved the leather satchel from the trunk. I followed him to the front door. Under the doormat, I found the spare key, right where it had always been. Liam unlocked the door, pushed it open, and we stepped into the house. It smelled of stale coffee and my mother's cloying perfume. He placed the satchel on the floor in the middle of the entryway. We didn't open it. We didn't leave a note. We just set it there, a silent, damning testament. We walked out, and Liam locked the door behind us. Back in the car, the silence was different. It was no longer tense, but hollowed out, empty. We had returned their burden, but the space it had occupied in our lives was now a gaping wound. Later that night, long after the kids were tucked into their beds, the house swaddled in a fragile quiet, I finally answered my phone. It was my mother. Her voice was a confection of bright, manufactured concern. "Elara. Honey, we were so worried. You just vanished. Is everything okay?" I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to walk into it. "Is Liam okay?" "The kids," she pressed, a slight tremor in her cheerfulness. "We tried to call. We were about to phone the police." Still, I was silent. Her voice dropped, losing its airy quality, becoming thin and sharp. "Where's the bag, Elara?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment, savoring the raw, ugly truth of it. "We dropped it off," I said, my voice flat and cold. "It's at your house." I paused, then added, "If it was that important to you, maybe you should have taken it yourselves." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound, but it was everything. It was the sound of being caught. She knew that I knew. The entire flimsy construction of her concern, her love, her motherhood, disintegrated in that single, shared moment of understanding. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to explain. "We're done," I said, the words feeling both impossible and liberating. "This is over. Don't call me again. Don't try to see the kids. We are done." I ended the call before she could reply, and for the first time, I felt the solid ground of my own resolve beneath my feet. It was a terrifying and exhilarating foundation. For 2 days, there was silence. A deep, unnerving quiet that felt more like a held breath than a peaceful resolution. I moved through my days in a haze, making school lunches and folding laundry as if the world hadn't tilted on its axis. Liam was a quiet, steady presence, a lighthouse in my personal fog. We didn't talk much about it. The reality of it was too vast, too monstrous to be contained in words. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach clench, who it was. There's a particular energy that precedes people who believe they are owed something, a pressure against the door that feels like a demand. I took a deep breath, opened the door just wide enough to slip through, and closed it firmly behind me, leaving my home and my life on the other side of the wood. There they were. My parents, Genevieve and Richard, standing on my porch as if they had just dropped by with a pie. My mother was wearing a chic trench coat, a silk scarf knotted at her throat. My father stood slightly behind her, his hands in his pockets, attempting an expression of paternal concern. "Elara," my mother began, her smile a masterpiece of strained warmth. "We were so worried. We just wanted to talk, to clear the air." I crossed my arms, a simple, physical boundary. I waited. My father cleared his throat. You really gave us a scare. We didn't know what to think. Didn't you? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. The question hung between us. My mother's smile faltered. We don't know what you're imagining, darling, but you've clearly blown this all out of proportion. The bag, I said, cutting through her pretense. The bag you put in my car. With my children in the back seat. The bag you were planning to have me smuggle across an international border. A flicker of something fear, or maybe just annoyance at being caught, crossed my father's face. Now, hold on. It wasn't like that. It was just a small thing, to help with some debts. A friend of a friend. No big deal. We were desperate, Elara, my mother cut in, her voice taking on a quavering, wounded tone. It was a performance I had seen 100 times. Serena's boy, the school. We had no other choice. You wouldn't help us. There it was. The pivot. The swift, practiced motion of placing the blame squarely back on me. My boundary wasn't a healthy act of self-preservation, it was the cause of their criminality. My refusal to be their safety net was the reason they had decided to risk my entire family's future. A strange calm washed over me. The part of me that would have once dissolved in guilt, that would have absorbed their accusations like a sponge, was gone. It had been burned away on that gravel road. You didn't just risk getting caught with something illegal, I said, my voice low and even. You risked me. You risked Liam. You risked your grandchildren being taken away from us. You used us as shields because you are cowards. My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. My father's face hardened, his affable mask slipping to reveal the cold resentment beneath. We're done, I repeated, the words feeling more solid this time. I mean it. You are not a part of our lives anymore. You will not come to this house. You will not contact my children. This is over. My mother opened her mouth, a retort forming on her lips. But then she seemed to reconsider. A strange, knowing little smile touched her mouth. It was the most chilling expression I had ever seen on her face. You'll come around, Elara, she said, her voice soft and confident. You always do. I stared at her for a long moment, at this woman who was a stranger to me, this woman who saw my love not as a gift, but as a tool she was entitled to use. Then I turned, walked back inside my house, and locked the door. I leaned against it, listening to the sound of their footsteps retreating down the path, and for the first time in my life, I knew with absolute certainty that she was wrong. 3 days later, my world shattered again. I arrived at the kids' elementary school for the afternoon pickup. The playground was emptying out, but Leo and Maya were nowhere in sight. My heart seized. I found their teacher, Ms. Albright, tidying up her classroom. Oh, she said, smiling brightly. You must have just missed them. Your parents picked them up about 20 minutes ago. They said you were stuck in a meeting and had asked them to get the kids as a surprise. I don't remember the drive. I think I may have teleported through sheer force of will and white-hot rage. I burst into my parents' house without knocking. The scene inside was one of calculated, weaponized affection. The living room looked like a toy store had exploded. There was a brand new, massive Lego Star Wars set on the floor, open boxes of candy on the coffee table, and brightly colored balloons bobbing against the ceiling. Leo and Maya were ecstatic, their faces sticky with sugar, their eyes wide with the thrill of this unexpected bounty. My parents were in their element, playing the role of doting, magical grandparents to perfection. My mother was slicing a store-bought cake, and my father was on the floor, helping Leo assemble a droid. They had never spoiled my children. Gifts were usually small, practical, or passive-aggressively educational. This was not a gift. This was a siege. It was a declaration of war, fought with plastic toys and chocolate. It was a message, loud and clear. We can get to them. We can buy their love. We can make you the villain who takes the fun away. We're leaving, I said, my voice shaking with a fury so profound it felt like it might split me in two. The kids' faces fell. But why? Maya wailed, clutching a new stuffed unicorn. Grandma and Grandpa are playing with us. Now, I said, leaving no room for argument. My mother stood up, wiping her hands on an apron. Oh, Elara, don't be such a spoilsport. Let them have a little fun. I rounded on her. You went to their school. You lied to their teacher. You took them without my permission. "We're on the emergency contact list," my father said calmly from the floor, not looking up from the Lego. "It's perfectly legal." The cold, clinical cruelty of it stole my breath. This wasn't an impulsive act of love. It was a premeditated move to undermine my authority, to prove that my boundaries were meaningless. "Can we keep the toys?" Leo asked, his voice small, his eyes pleading. He was caught in the crossfire, and he knew it. I looked at the mountain of plastic, the brightly colored boxes that were nothing more than ammunition. And in that moment, I made a decision. Taking the toys would make me the monster. It would prove their point. "Yes," I said, my voice tight. "You can keep them. Now get your coats. We are going home." As I herded my bewildered, tear-streaked children out the door, my mother called after me, her voice syrupy sweet and laced with triumph. "See, Elara? They'll always choose us. They'll always come back." That night, after the kids were asleep, surrounded by the spoils of their grandparents' emotional war, I sat on the edge of our bed. Liam sat beside me, his hand on my back, a silent, solid support. "We have to leave," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He didn't ask why. He just nodded slowly. "I don't want them anywhere near the kids," I continued, the words tumbling out. "Not at school, not at the park, not in this city. I will never feel safe here again." "My company," Liam said quietly, "the Santa Fe office. The transfer is still an option. My parents are there." His parents. Kind, stable, drama-free people who sent birthday cards on time and asked for nothing in return. A world away from the toxic gravity of my own. I had resisted the idea before, unwilling to leave the only home I'd ever known, still clinging to some foolish hope of reconciliation. Now, there was no hesitation. "Let's take it," I said. "Let's go." It wasn't a decision born of anger or a desire for revenge. It was a quiet, desperate act of self-preservation. We weren't running away. We were running toward peace. We were choosing to burn the bridge, scatter the ashes, and never, ever look back. 6 months later, I was standing on a dusty patio in Santa Fe, watching the setting sun paint the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in shades of rose and violet. The air was thin and dry, smelling of pinyon and earth, a world away from the damp, green embrace of Oregon. Our new life was taking root in the high desert, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, the quiet felt like peace, not a prelude to a storm. We hadn't disappeared in a dramatic puff of smoke. We had simply excised ourselves. We changed our numbers, forwarded only essential mail, and informed a few trusted friends of our move, swearing them to secrecy. To my family, we had vanished. Liam's parents, who lived a 20-minute drive away, had folded us into their lives with a gentle, uncomplicated warmth that felt like a revelation. They helped with the kids, brought over casseroles, and talked about the weather and local politics, never once demanding an emotional toll for their love. One afternoon, a call came through on my new phone from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to it. It was a cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, Elara," her voice was tentative. "It's Maria. Listen, your mom called me. She's really upset, says she has no idea where you are. She said you just cut everyone off for no reason. I don't know what's going on over there, but she's your mother. Family is everything, you know." I stood there for a moment, the phone in my hand, feeling the old, familiar tug of guilt. It was a phantom limb, an ache where something had been amputated. Then I looked out the window at my children playing in the yard, their laughter clear and unburdened in the golden light. I deleted the message. I didn't call back. I didn't explain. I was done explaining. My peace was more important than their understanding. The final chapter arrived not with a phone call, but an email. The subject line was stark, emergency. It was from my sister Serena. For a long time, I just stared at it, my finger hovering over the delete button. Curiosity, or perhaps the need for a definitive end, won out. I opened it. The email was a long, rambling, punctuation-free torrent of panic. The gist was this: our parents had been arrested. They had tried it again, this time on their own. No middlemen, no unsuspecting daughters. Just the two of them, in their late 60s, trying to drive their luxury sedan across the border with a trunk full of illegal, high-end pharmaceuticals. They had been, of course, caught. The charges were serious. Possession with intent to distribute. Smuggling across an international border. Serena's email ended with a desperate, frantic plea. They need a good lawyer, Alara. They need money. Bail. This is real jail time. You're the only one with any savings. You have to put the past aside. They are our family. You have to show up for them. I read that last line several times. You have to show up for them. I hit reply. My fingers were steady on the keyboard. I typed only 9 words. I did show up once. Never again. Good luck. I sent it. And then I blocked her email address. Word trickled back to me eventually, through the slow, inevitable gossip of the family grapevine. They took a plea deal. My father got 4 years, my mother 3. Not a life sentence, but enough to shatter the carefully constructed facade of their lives forever. Enough time, perhaps, to sit in the quiet of a prison cell and reflect on the choices that led them there. But I doubted they would. In their story, I knew they would always be the victims, and I, the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned them in their time of need. Sometimes at night, when the house is still and the vast desert sky is littered with stars, I think about them. I don't feel anger anymore, or even the sharp sting of betrayal. What I feel is a kind of distant, sorrowful pity. I think of the love I had for them, a fierce, dutiful love that I now realize was directed at a fiction they had created. The real Genevieve and Richard were strangers to me. I did not go too far. I did not go far enough. I simply went where I had to go to protect my children and reclaim myself. We didn't disappear, we escaped. And in the space created by that distance, we found something we never could have had with them, a quiet, ordinary, and profoundly beautiful life. It is a life built not on image, but on truth. And that, I have learned, is the only foundation that will ever truly hold.